Although, I've seen some scripts, I know the words weren't spelled right. There was hardly any commas in it at all. So I don't think that's too important.
Hey, you want to get on the train here, or you want to ruin another take, huh?
It's too cerebral. We're trying to make a movie here, not a film.
Bum bum ba-dum 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 bum bum doobie doobie da 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 doobie doobie da.
Welcome to another episode of the In the Mouth of Darkness Chatcast, and as you can tell, this is a special event. What's the deal with that music? But don't worry, we're going to get to it in a second, because joining me today is Lisa Gullickson, wife dork. Hey Lisa, how's it going?
Weird. It's going weird.
It is going weird. It's weird out there, right?
Yeah.
Pandemic.
Yeah, just a touch.
Just a touch.
We just got a touch of the pandemic.
Just a touch
we don't
of the
have
pandemic.
I should reword that. We don't have it.
That we know of.
That we know of.
We can't test.
We could be Idris Elbaing it.
Yeah, we don't know.
Symptomless.
We don't know. But Lisa and I are living the life of social distancing, spending all our time indoors.
As much as we can.
And yeah, it's been a heck of a thing, but I don't want to dwell on the depressing aspects of it.
Because there are exciting things afoot. Creepy things.
Yeah, creepy things, cool things. We are super excited to have Liz and Jimmy Reed, the art duo known as Cuddles and Rage, joining us on the podcast today, talking about their new book, Bites of Terror, 10, what is it?
Frightfully
Delicious
Tales.
Delicious Tales. Okay, full disclosure, you may already know this if you're a longtime listener, but Liz and Jimmy are big friends of us.
We love them.
We love them, and it's wild to me that we know people as cool as Cuddles and Rage, right? I like, how long have we known them? It's been like 5 years.
It's got to be longer than that.
It's probably longer than that. I remember the first time I met them was at a small press expo out in Bethesda, Maryland. We had been communicating online, and they had said, like, oh, if you're coming to SPX, you got to make sure you come and buy the table. And I went by the table, and they were like, crazy nice to me.
Well, they knew you from the onlines. They knew the mouth dork.
Yeah, but like at that point, I was just like some Twitter dope. I hadn't really
A charming Twitter dope.
You know what? It maybe was 10 years ago, because had I even launched the In the Mouth of Darkness blog by that point? I don't.
Yes, because if your Twitter handle was mouth.
Oh, yes, you're right. Right. So early days of In the Mouth of Darkness.
Yeah.
Blog spot days. But anyway, they were like crazy nice to me. And I remember thinking that these people are too darn nice. They can't possibly mean it. But then every time I kept encountering them, they got nicer and nicer. And then they joined up with our film club at Alamo Drafthouse in Ashburn. And we became like, fast friends.
But the way that they keep it so nice all the time is that they get their angst out in their comics. And they write super dark, food-related ha-has that are brilliant.
Yeah. Bites of Terror, it actually comes out next Tuesday. You can order it from your local bookstores or the onlines. I mean, you're going to have to do it online, because if your neck of the woods is anything like our neck of the woods right now, a lot of shops are doing just curbside deliveries of books.
Which I think is good, because you should be supporting your local comic book stores if you can.
Absolutely. Shout out to Big Planet Comics. They are doing mail-away packages of all your subscriptions, and I'm incredibly thankful to them.
You know what that means? Unboxing.
And
that's always fun.
Yeah. So, find your favorite dealer and place an order for Bites of Terror. It comes out Tuesday, like we said.
We read it. We love it. We each have different favorite stories from it. I think that you can learn a lot about a person from which of these 10 frightful, delicious tales is your fave.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that statement. Now, the way we're doing this interview this week is, as you heard, there are 2 theme songs at the start of this episode. That second theme song, after the record scratch that I cleverly put into there.
You're an amazing editor.
I'm such a good editor. That belongs to Comic Book Couples Counseling, which is our other podcast that we do where we talk about our favorite superheroes, our favorite non-superheroes, our comic book couples that we love and adore, and then we pair a relationship book with that couple to help them through their dark times.
That's right.
And so the second half of this interview is going to drop with the book next Tuesday over at Comic Book Couples Counseling. You can search it on iTunes by typing in Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast.
Yeah. It's nice to share the love. I know that I went on their website, cuddlesandrage.com. You should visit it. But it breaks my heart to see all of these events that they've planned to promote their book getting postponed and canceled. And so I'm so grateful that we have this platform to share their amazing art. And and you should share these eps, and you should buy these books, and you should tweet about them, because artists are coming out of everywhere and they deserve to be celebrated.
And one thing we should mention also on top of that is going into this interview, it was recorded like 3 weeks ago, so we won't be talking about the pandemic in any way. Thank God. I need some distraction. And also, their poor little dog, Biscotti, was having some digestive issues, had some
tum-tum problems.
Yeah, some negative reactions to some food, and there's some barking. There's some barking,
and there's Liz and Jimmy going out and coming back in, but Brad is editing it. I'm sure it sounds fantabulous, but if that is distracting, just prepare yourself. I'm always happy. Like when I'm listening to a podcast, if I'm listening to Natch Butte and I hear Chooch barking away, I love it.
You're barely going to hear the dog, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You're amazing.
You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine, guys.
Job.
So we've been rambling on long enough. Let's jump into this conversation and have a good time. Thanks again, Liz and Jimmy. Yay, Cuddles and Rage.
Yay.
Hey, and as promised, we are back with Liz and Jimmy Reed, a.k.a. Cuddles and Rage, authors of the new book, Bites of Terror, 10 Frightfully Delicious Tales, published by Quirk Books. You know this already because I've already talked about this in the intro, but now I'm introing it to our guests so that they also know what they're going to talk about. Hey, Liz. Hey, Jimmy.
Hello.
Guests, so nice. We introduced them twice.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, we have read the book. We've loved the book. We have our favorites.
Don't. Are you going to spoil our favorite cartoons?
Should I not?
I mean,
Make-A-Wish is my favorite.
Make-A-Wish is Lisa's favorite. Okay.
Oh, okay. These are things that we need to know because we're going into award season, and so we gotta submit some stories here. So.
Well, I mean, deviled egg's my favorite, but that's because there's a bagel named Brad in it.
Yeah. So what was the genesis of Bites of Terror? Because being Cuddles and Rage enthusiasts, we've seen the DNA of Bites of Terror in Dr. Taquito, in your short videos like Bloody Mary and Deadly Cocktail. But when did those kind of dark food-related stories begin for Bites of Terror?
Well, even before Bites of Terror, when we started Cuddles and Rage, our stories were pretty dark. Sometimes uncomfortable to describe. I think your audience would appreciate it. We did have a peanut with a gag ball at times, which does not match our flavor now. We went extreme when we started. In early days of Cuddles and Rage, we were kind of figuring out our voice. And as we displayed our work at shows, we actually ended up in the Kid Lit area, which is what people probably know us as in bookstores from our Sweet Series books. But our heart is always in the dark, twisted humor. So after publishing 2 picture books, we wanted to go back to doing something dark and twisted. And specifically something in the horror realm, because horror is really what Jimmy and I share. We actually bonded over horror on our first date. So one day when I was walking our dog, I was just thinking about Tales from the Crypt, which is a show that I grew up on and loved immensely. And I was like, well, what if you did that with food? And so I ran inside and told Jimmy, and his words was write a proposal. And so I kind of sat down outside and came up with some germs of ideas and fed that to Jimmy. And then he came back with some ideas, and we just ended up loving this concept so much that we had this editor who has been asking us to do kind of more adult stories, and adult in the sense that it's more like all ages versus like kid stories where you're limited to like the 0 to 8 age range, which always weirds me out that 0 is an age range. So this just felt like the perfect story to pitch to our editor at Quirk, especially because I felt the timing was just right, because I think at San Diego Comic-Con, I think Shudder had just announced that they were going to bring back Creepshow. And so I was like, okay, well, horror anthology, if you don't, submit this proposal now, you're going to pass the boat on this. So it ended up just being perfect timing, the right idea at the right time.
What does it mean for you guys to bring the Cuddles and Rage persona to book form after having had the success with Sweet Competition and Sweet Success in the kids' realm? Like, what is that satisfaction like?
It's been great to get back to that. We love our kids' books too. We love telling all kinds of stories, but it was especially fun to write these 10 little tales because we got to write a whole lot and throw a bunch of ideas back and forth. I liked that it kind of fed out of the way we make comics, where we're telling little simple stories and being able to kind of generate a number of tales that we could twist together to kind of get a bunch of stories out of our system at once. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and if you go through the history of our comics, which, we've kind of, as we've grown as storytellers, we've kind of cleaned up some of our comics to just try and mostly have ones that are on brand on our website. But if you dig deep into the internet, then you might see that some of the stories that you find in Bites of Terror really stemmed from some comics that we wrote back in like 2010 that were just one-word jokes that we've grown into full-on beginning, middle, and end stories.
And there was never any concern about how you differentiate the Sweet Success world from the Bites of Terror world?
Yeah, this is something we've sort of been working through ever since we started making content and showing it at comic conventions, because the characters we make, the colors we use, they're all bright, and who doesn't love a donut? But when you start looking at what the donut's up to or what he's going through, I guess it's more emotional terror in a lot of ways, the stuff we work on. We want to make sure that we're designating that for people who are looking at things on our table. So we've always had sort of sections where when someone comes up to talk to us, if it's a younger person, we kind of point them toward things that are most appropriate for where they're at.
Yeah, we're like, check out this row.
Yeah. I don't think we have anything that's like too over the top, and we talk to the parents always if there's a kid who's at the table and explain to them what we do. We show them certain things to help them make the decision if it's appropriate for their child. Because I know I grew up watching horror films with my parents, and there's all kinds of different access that kids have to that, and I think the parents really are the gatekeeper there. So we've done our best to try to make sure that they're aware of what we do, and not just like have a kid pick up a book that has something being slaughtered in it.
Yeah, and I think the best example there is with a self-published book that we created called Santaconda, which ultimately it's not really a scary book, but spoiler, Santaconda eats children. And for some children, that's a really scary concept, because what we learned going through the kidlit industry is that oftentimes children see themselves as the main character. And so if you have like a really imaginative child who puts themselves in that position, that could be very, very scary. So we don't want to be the ones making that decision for the parents. We'd rather be overly sensitive than to have somebody shocked, because especially going through comic conventions, there is a lot of indie comic conventions specifically. There is a lot of work that does look kid friendly, and then you open it, and even I, as an adult woman, will start blushing and being like, "Oh, I didn't know I was getting into this." So,
all of that being said, though, like I can see an 11 and a half year old make Cuddles and Rage their identity, because aside from the super dark, murderous kinds of stuff, there's no swearing. It's never overtly sexual. Like, I think that to a kid with a dark side, it's extreme. I think it's pretty accessible.
Yeah, it's like Edward Gorey or
Yeah.
like Far Side cartoons. You know, they could be pretty demented, but you gravitate towards that stuff and you wear it like a badge of pride. You read it with pride.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that when people really ask about our storytelling journey and, referencing our work when we first got started in 2008, that's where, like, maybe we wrote one comic with a swear word in it, and then we both looked at each other and was like, this doesn't feel right. Or, sometime I might have written a joke or two that was overtly sexual, and then afterwards it'd be like, this doesn't feel right. So I think that for us, on this 10-year journey, it's been so interesting to look back and find the jokes that we've written or the stories that we've told, and just find that, that niche group where, this is where we want to be. And the way you explained it exactly, it's like we want an 11-year-old kid to pick this book up and to enjoy it just as much as somebody who's like in their 20s. I think there are different jokes in the book that appeal to all the different age ranges.
Yeah, for sure. And, when I pick up Reap What You Sow, like the tragedy and the terror of that ending is probably more painful for me as an adult than if a kid read that story and just took it at face value.
So not only has your storytelling evolved, but your aesthetic has evolved a lot since the beginning of Cuddles and Rage. And you've gone from doing mostly hand-drawn comics to now all of your Sweet Competition and Bites of Terror are dioramas. And what moved you towards that style of storytelling, particularly for a comic?
Yeah, when we first started with Cuddles and Rage, we did the hand-drawn stuff, like you were saying, and it was kind of our entry point to just get something out there into the world. We were both looking for an outlet, and that was something we could collaborate on and start producing. And not long after we did that, a friend of ours was working with polymer clay, and it was kind of intriguing because they were making food, and we're like, oh, hey, we're drawing food. What if we tried to bring these to life? And I think the practical effects world of films and stop motion work and those kind of things are always something I've been drawn to, and I know you have too, Liz. Mm-hmm. So the opportunity to kind of bring this off the page and make it real in front of us just was something we definitely wanted to try. And it's a time-consuming process, so you can be much faster at putting work out when you're drawing them, or at least we can for the kind of work that we do. But telling stories, that's been the thing that people have gravitated to most with us, I think, is just kind of seeing that real-life thing that feels so tactile.
Yeah, and I think we've gotten addicted to the challenge of making the stuff come to life, too. With every story, in particular in Bites of Terror, there was definitely like a prop or a set where we had to try something new that we've never attempted before, which I think now post-book, it's really upped our skill set.
Yeah, I mean, again, I have Reap What You Sow opened up in front of me right now, and it's not just the art of the diorama and sculpture, it's the art of lighting. When it goes full giallo in that book, in that story, it's really impressive, but that's a hell of a thing to have to capture.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because especially when working with various, especially bright colors with our palette that we lean towards, it is hard sometimes to make sure a certain color is not running hot, especially greens. Greens can be kind of evil sometimes. But yeah, I appreciate you noticing that, because we did try and pull in the bright colors of horror, because for me, I feel like in the 90s we saw a lot of like dark horror that just didn't have any color in it. And, for us, we wanted to bring back the fun of horror and the beauty of color that giallo brought to the genre.
But at the same time, when you're writing these stories down, when you're first mapping out these tales, it's all very easy to write. It has its own challenges,
right.
But you get the idea, you put it out on the page.
And now you have to create it, and now you have to bring it, to 4. You have to make it in space.
You have to manifest it, right? when that process starts, the actual making of the sets and the characters, are there regrets and changes to the script based on like, oh my God, what have we done to ourselves?
Yeah, I think that I definitely put Liz through some stuff because she's the primary sculptor. And so when I would write a story like, what would you say was the one?
Oh my God, every story. I feel like I tell people that we've spoken with on this journey. I'm like, if the sets look complicated, that was Jimmy.
So Don't Cry, for example, that kind of goes from an apartment scene into kind of a weird, crazy outdoor situation.
Right.
Yeah, writing that story and trying to come up with something interesting to take the characters through, I was trying to focus on that. And something that Liz and I came up with pretty early on in putting this book together because of the amount of things we had to make. I mean, telling all these different stories together, we had to kind of be organized at how we went across this. We definitely went through a storyboarding pass as a first edit pass on each of these stories, just to try to get a feel for what are we signing ourselves up for.
Yeah, and I think specifically in Don't Cry, each time Jimmy changed a setting, I would be like, do we really need to like change location? Because that's a whole lot of work. Or like with Unfortunate Cookie, I was like, how many cookies do you want in this story, really? Like, I feel bad because I'm, not like I want to scale back, but you have a deadline and you're, so every time you add another layer, you have to try and do that within the same amount of time that you started off with. And I think what's really cool about this whole entire book that kind of changed our working process together is that, throughout our career, I've been the main sculptor, but because we were stretching ourselves so far and wanting to try new things, like Jimmy, especially with Unfortunate Cookie, like he hopped on board and he would get like the base of the cookie going and then I would finish it off. And I think it made us reevaluate how we could work together more efficiently.
Oh, that's cool. How long did you have to put this book together once your proposal had been picked up?
Okay, well, funny story. I thought it would take us 6 months, which is kind of typical for a graphic novel and what publishers want to hear. And so we were like, oh, yeah, we can do this in 6 months, even though the books prior to this book is 144 pages, which with like 6 to 8 images per page. And the books before that we've done would be Picture Book World, which is for us, they were actually 40 pages with 1 image per page. So anyways, in other words, like an extreme leap. But we're like, oh, sure, we'll just keep the sets really simple, Jimmy. And we'll keep their sets really simple. We'll keep the story simple, and then we'll be able to do it in 6 months. That didn't happen because we wanted to get the stories right. If you have like a beautiful looking book, but the stories are crap, then, sometimes it feels like, what's the point of making it? So we wanted to get the stories right and we wanted to push ourselves. And that actually, from start to finish, like a little bit before the proposal, it actually took us a whole year to make.
I remember you working right up to the wire going into Fantastic Fest. And it was like, is Liz going to make it to Fantastic Fest?
I was still working on Fantastic Fest. Like, I told our editor, I was like, look, even though I'm gone, like, I'm still available. Yeah. I was prepared to miss all the films just to make sure I was there for our publisher because they were so gracious with us in terms of time.
I do want to get back to talking about the inspirations. You see Tales from the Crypt, you go like, oh, man, Tales from the Crypt plus us equals genius. We got to make that happen. And then you have to start crafting these, 13 little horror tales. How did you determine what styles to pursue, what types of tropes, what types of stories to tackle for Brights of Terror?
That's something we were trying to be very careful about, actually, was not repeating or not using the same ideas multiple times in the book. So we drafted a few different concepts is kind of how this all started, and we worked together to pitch those out to get the book going. And from there, we tried to make sure we were giving each one a unique angle or a unique voice. And we definitely were pulling from influences. Like, we watch a movie a day just about. A lot of it's horror. We want to to honor some of the tropes that we see and not kind of go down the normal path so much, but also to try to twist that into a food world and give our characters a unique voice, a human voice, with their own unique personalities. So the drafting process was kind of this idea of putting the thoughts down about what these stories could be and then looking at them collectively to kind of understand the whole scope of what we were putting together.
And then how was the formatting process, like putting it together into a menu and that whole thing?
I think for that section, I think Jimmy worked really closely with our editor, Rick, and they were able to kind of see where the flow would kind of work with like the appetizers and the entrees and the desserts. Because let's be honest, like if it was just me, it would all be desserts. like I don't know why, but I gravitate towards desserts for everything. But I think that kind of natural flow, like how you would read a menu, which is how our oh my gosh, what is that?
Table of contents.
Table of contents, thank you. That's how our table of contents reads, which is like a menu. I think it gave it this kind of leaned into the food concept even more and it gave it another dimension that we weren't thinking about in the beginning necessarily.
And I feel like it gave it another set of pacing. Like as you're reading through the book and you're feeling each of these stories pass, like having it also broken into bigger chunks, like was really satisfying to read.
Yeah, I think for me as a reader, I read before bed a lot of times, and sometimes I'll only make it through a page or two, and I'll be like, I read before bed, check.
Yeah.
Or sometimes I'll stay up all night, and I really, truly appreciate when it comes to graphic novels if there is a good stopping point for me, because it means I can go to bed, you know, instead of having to read 20 more pages to finish a story.
Yeah, like vignettes or like compilations of things, I've always loved those. Brad, you mentioned Far Side earlier. So just these little snippets of stories. I just love that, being able to consume lots and lots of stories because they're all so small. Or even like sketch comedy shows like The State or Kids in the Hall. Or like even movies like Tampopo that have just these vignettes that happen in them. I'm always drawn to those. So it was fun to kind of tackle this that way.
Carrying all these stories together, the through line, you know, your Crypt Keeper is the Cake Creeper. And he's really my favorite thing about the entire book.
Just aesthetically.
He's aesthetically,
just amazing.
But yeah, and concept-wise, right? And he's... The whole book hangs on him, design-wise and story-wise. How long did it take you to get to the Cake Creeper, and how long did you take to perfect that character?
Well, I think the name came to us pretty quickly because it was just kind of, you know, taking the Crypt Keeper and how can you have fun with that in the food world. But when it came down to the design, Jimmy and I went back and forth on the character multiple times because, you know, your host of your horror anthology is like your piece de resistance. Like that has to be somebody who can carry your story on for as long as it can go. So that wasn't a design that we took lightly. And so we went back and forth on that a few times and really wanted to make him creepy and like something that you might not want to eat, but then you kind of want to eat. Like I would take a bite out of him to see what he tastes like. He's not too gross, but he's still not a cake that you would order for your wedding.
I mean, you know, this is a tremendous compliment, but I think there's a lot of characters in your book that I'd take a nibble out of.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
In fact, after reading Deviled Egg, I had deviled eggs.
He did. He's highly suggestible.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about the comic book aspect of the whole concept, because it is very much a graphic novel. You know, it is sequential art, and that is not new to Cuddles and Rage by any means, but to this extent, it sort of feels like something grander than what you've accomplished before.
Oh gosh, I mean, I think that taking our germs of ideas and making sure that they weren't just a one-panel comic, you know, that took a lot of work because, you know, an idea could be funny in one sentence, but if you don't really have a story arc there, then there's no point in telling the story.
We also have video backgrounds, like we both worked in video and film, and we storyboard a lot when we make video work for ourselves. So, that's something we try to apply to this process too, kind of treating them like, as if we were to animate this, what moves would we make? What shots would we want to show, and kind of direct this? Liz just stepped out to go see what's up.
That's cool. That's cool. How are you organizing the panels? Like, do you do thumbnails beforehand? Do you or do you do a complete breakdown? Do you do layouts? Like, what is that?
Or you could even do multiple takes, because like your characters are like tactile, so you can go in and you can like move them around and go like, oh, does this take look better? Does that take look better?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of a combination of those things. So because we were trying to plan the timing so much, because we had so much volume of work to sculpt and shoot and edit, it was really important to us to use that storyboarding path to give ourselves a solid guide. And we tried to stick to that process as much as we could. So, for us, it was important to try to get that shot list and then just go get all those shots as quickly as we could. The characters are movable, and we were able to get some different shots, but a lot of kind of the behind the scenes of it is propping things up and making sure that they're just in the right position for the camera. And so there's a lot of kind of fine tuning and careful manipulation that we're going through to make sure they stay just where they are when we take the shot.
Lots of tweezers.
Yeah, a lot of pins and tweezers. So we did take multiple shots and angles, but mostly we tried to kind of get that vetted out in the storyboarding process, and that went through multiple passes, not just from which shots to get, but also we would go through a detail pass where we would talk about what kind of accessories or background items or what, how do these characters live and what do we need to make to put in the scene with them.
You've already talked a little bit about how Liz is like the main sculptor. So I'm interested in, since you guys do work as a pair, what is the most collaborative task that you do? And what are some of the things you delegate? These are Jimmy's things that he does. These are Liz's things that she does.
I think the most collaborative process would be picking the stories. With this book in particular, just because of the workload and the timeline, Jimmy took 5 of the stories and I took 5 of the stories. We would write our own respective stories and then we'd swap them and edit them. So that was a pretty hands-on process for both of us. And I think that when we got to the point where the stories were written and we had to go into production, then the tasks were kind of divided at that point, where Jimmy, if you see a lot of these little meta jokes or Easter eggs throughout the book, that's mostly Jimmy. And then I'm mostly making the sets at that point. So Jimmy's going through with a fine-tooth comb and adding in extra details, and I'm focusing on the big picture.
Yeah, and it's like taking that storyboard and then that detail pass of how do we fill in the world of these characters, then that would turn into a list of stuff to go make, because we made or found or bought almost everything that's in the book. So that would turn into a giant to-do list that's on a spreadsheet, and we'd go through and put names on tasks and
yeah.
go down.
And I would say with the Cake Reaper, because he does have a storyline throughout, and we wanted that to be as rich as the stories as we were telling. That was all Jimmy. I made it. We have the only thing I really contributed to the Cake Reaper is here's a name, the Cake Reaper, and maybe some of the design bits. But the story, that was really Jimmy, and I feel like that's a voice that he was born to write. Because not to belittle myself, but I'm the Cake Reaper uses some big words. I like to use words that I use in my daily vocabulary. So Jimmy was good at making him sound fancy.
What is the key to maintaining a relationship and producing a comic?
Ooh, cliffhanger. I bet you're dying to find out, but you won't find out until Tuesday.
CBCC Podcast, Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and Podbean. Go
right.
find us, go subscribe, send us some love, leave us some reviews over there. We could use it.
But first, leave reviews over here, too.
Yes, so yes. Naturally.
5 stars.
I really enjoyed that conversation. That part right there is really like the nitty-gritty of the construction of Bites of Terror. Next week, what you're going to hear is a little bit more of, well, as you saw by my cliffhanger question, a little bit more of the relationship stuff.
Yeah.
It
didn't get as mushy as I wanted to.
No, it did not. You wanted to get down to the kissing and the bedroom talk.
Right.
And
But
I'm a prude.
I felt like Liz was definitely willing to go there.
Yeah.
Jimmy, I don't know.
Yeah. Liz was ready to go there. I was not either. So there you have it. Next week on this podcast, we are finally, and I know I've been saying this, but I promise we are launching our Sundance interviews.
Oh my goodness.
Jim Rash, Nat Faxon. I've been talking about this interview for weeks, but it is finally upon us. We're talking about the film Downhill.
Which we really enjoyed.
We really enjoyed. It is not just a force majeure remake. There, we said it. And we also have an Eliza Hittman interview coming up. She's talking about her film Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. And Billy, he's got a conversation all the way from L.A. with Memory, the Origins of Alien director Alexander O'Philippe. And I can't wait for that because that guy kicked off this entire podcast in our very first episode.
Oh my goodness, is something coming full circle?
Something's coming full circle. But again, Comic Book Couples Counseling, jump on over there. Go listen to the rest of this interview. You're not going to want to miss it. And order your copies of Bites of Terror right now.
You don't even have to wait until Tuesday. They have this amazing thing called pre-order. Click it. Click it or ticket.
So, Lisa,
yes?
Where can our listeners find you online?
I can always be found accepting words of affirmation at Sidewalk Siren on Twitter, Instagram, and occasionally, rarely, Letterboxd.
And you can follow Liz and Jimmy at Cuddles and Rage on Twitter. But guess what? They're also on TikTok. And Liz, for like the last week, has been killing it on TikTok. And she is begging Lisa and I to get on that platform. And I'm a little nervous.
I don't know. I can't dance.
You can't dance?
That's what I think all the young people
I was
do.
thinking, like, could we do some kind of stop motion animation thing with our action figures?
Wow, that's really, that's really ambitious.
Yeah, and we're going to have a lot of time on our hands, I think.
We should probably look at TikTok first and figure out what it's about.
I don't know. I'm saying we're going to get on it, Lisa. We're going to get on TikTok.
Sure.
But we're not there yet.
TikTok.
Oh, no. Kesha. Follow our other dorks. Brian Young at The Turtle Dork, at The Turtle Dork 1 on Instagram. Darren Smith at The Disco Dork. He's sometimes on Twitter. He's sometimes on Instagram. But I don't see him a lot these days. So send him some pokes and get him back on the social medias. Billy Dass is the Indie Dork, and he's at WB Dass on all social medias. And I am Brad Gullickson at Mouthdork on all social medias. And until next time, guys, take care.
Visions are worth fighting for. Why spend your life making someone else's dreams